Presidential assassinations that shook America. President Ronald Reagan. On March 30th, 1981, Ronald Reagan, the 40th President of the United States, was shot and wounded by John Hinckley Jr. in Washington, D.C., as he was returning to his limousine after delivering a speech at the Washington Hilton Hotel. Hinckley believed that the attack would impress actress Jodie Foster, with whom he had developed an obsessive sexual fixation after watching her in the 1976 film Taxi Driver. Reagan sustained a severe gunshot wound when a .22 caliber revolver bullet ricocheted off the presidential limousine and struck him under his left armpit. The bullet fractured a rib, punctured a lung, and caused massive internal bleeding. The president was near death upon arrival at George Washington University Hospital, but doctors stabilized him in the emergency room before performing an urgent exploratory surgery. He recovered and was discharged from the hospital on April 11. White House Press Secretary James Brady, Secret Service agent Tim McCarthy, and D.C. police officer Thomas Delahanty were also injured. All three survived, but Brady suffered brain damage and was left permanently disabled. His death in 2014 was ruled a homicide, as it was ultimately caused by his injuries from the shooting. Hinckley was found not guilty by reason of insanity on charges of attempting to assassinate the president. He remained in custody at St. Elizabeth's Hospital, a psychiatric facility in Washington, D.C. In January 2015, federal prosecutors announced that they would not charge Hinckley in connection with Brady's death, despite the medical examiner ruling it a homicide. Hinckley was released from the psychiatric care facility on September 10, 2016. Pre-Duran, President John F. Kennedy. On November 22, 1963, John F. Kennedy, the 35th President of the United States, was assassinated while traveling in a motorcade through Dealey Plaza in Dallas, Texas. Seated in the car with First Lady Jacqueline Kennedy, Texas Governor John Connally, and his wife Nellie, Kennedy was fatally shot by former U.S. Marine Lee Harvey Oswald, who fired from the nearby Texas School Book Depository. The motorcade rushed to Parkland Hospital, where Kennedy was pronounced dead approximately 30 minutes after the attack. Governor Connally was also injured in the shooting, but survived and later recovered. Later that afternoon, Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson was sworn in as president aboard Air Force One at Dallas Love Field Airport. Oswald returned to his residence to retrieve a handgun and later shot and killed police officer J.D. Tippit, not long after the assassination. Approximately 70 minutes after Kennedy and Connally were shot, the Dallas Police Department arrested Oswald and charged him under Texas state law with the murders of Kennedy and Tippit. At 11:21 a.m. on November 24th, as live television cameras broadcast his transfer from the basement of the Dallas Police Headquarters, Oswald was fatally shot by Jack Ruby, a Dallas nightclub owner. Like Kennedy, Oswald was rushed to Parkland Hospital, where he was pronounced dead. Ruby was convicted of murdering Oswald, though his conviction was later overturned on appeal. He remained in custody and died in prison in 1967 while awaiting a new trial. After a 10-month investigation, the Warren Commission concluded that Oswald acted alone in assassinating Kennedy and that neither Oswald nor Ruby was part of any larger conspiracy. 4 years after the assassination, New Orleans District Attorney Jim Garrison charged businessman Clay Shaw with conspiring to assassinate Kennedy. However, Shaw was acquitted in 1969 in what remains the only trial ever held in connection with the assassination. Subsequent federal investigations, including those conducted by the Rockefeller Commission and the Church Committee, supported the findings of the Warren Commission, reaffirming that Oswald had acted alone. However, in 1979, the House Select Committee on Assassinations, HSCA, released a report concluding that Kennedy was likely assassinated as part of a conspiracy. While the HSCA did not identify specific conspirators, it suggested that there was a high probability that two gunmen fired at the president. The committee's conclusion was largely based on a dictabelt recording purportedly capturing gunshots during the assassination. However, the authenticity of this evidence was later dismissed by the U.S. Department of Justice. The assassination of Kennedy had a profound impact on public opinion and remains a widely debated topic, fueling numerous conspiracy theories and alternative narratives. Polls indicate that a majority of Americans believe there was a conspiracy behind the assassination rather than Oswald acting alone. This was the first of 4 major assassinations in the United States during the 1960s, occurring 2 years before the assassination of Malcolm X and 5 years before the assassinations of Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert F. Kennedy. Kennedy was the 4th U.S. president to be assassinated and remains the most recent president to have died while in office. President William McKinley. William McKinley, the 25th President of the United States, was shot at the Pan American Exposition at the Temple of Music in Buffalo, New York on September 6, 1901, just 6 months after being sworn in for his second term on March 4, 1901. At the time of the assassination, McKinley was greeting the public when Leon Czolgosz approached him and fired 2 shots into his abdomen. Despite receiving medical attention, McKinley succumbed to his wounds 8 days later, on September 14th, due to infection. The assassination of President William McKinley was the third successful presidential assassination in U.S. history, following those of Abraham Lincoln in 1865 and James A. Garfield in 1881. Czolgosz, the assassin, lost his job during the economic panic of 1893 and embraced anarchism, believing it was his duty to kill President McKinley, whom he saw as a symbol of oppression. After failing to get close to McKinley on a previous occasion, he shot the president twice while shaking his hand at the Temple of Music reception. 1 bullet grazed McKinley, while the other lodged in his abdomen and was never found. McKinley initially appeared to be recovering, but his condition worsened on September 13th when his wound became infected and he died early the following morning. He was succeeded by his vice president, Theodore Roosevelt. President James Garfield. The assassination of President James Abram Garfield was a shocking event that deeply impacted American public opinion at the time. It took place at 9:30 a.m. on Saturday, July 2nd, 1881, at the Baltimore and Potomac Railroad Station in Washington, D.C. The assassin was Charles J. Guiteau, a man suffering from political delusions. Guiteau was convicted of murder and sentenced to death by hanging 1 year later. President James A. Garfield was critically wounded in the attack and died 79 days later, on September 19, 1881, in Elberon, New Jersey. He became the second U.S. president to be assassinated, following Abraham Lincoln, who was killed after the Civil War. If failed assassination attempts are included, Garfield's shooting was the third such attack on a U.S. president, preceded by the unsuccessful attempt on President Andrew Jackson. James Abram Garfield was the 20th president in United States history. Just 200 days after taking office, he was assassinated. Although his time in office was brief, Garfield played a significant role in American political history. Yet today, he is often regarded as one of the most quickly forgotten U.S. presidents by the American public. President Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln, the 16th president of the United States, was assassinated on Good Friday, April 14, 1865, while attending a performance of Our American Cousin at Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C., as the American Civil War was drawing to a close. The assassination occurred just 5 days after General Robert E. Lee, commander of the Army of Northern Virginia of the Confederate States, surrendered to General Ulysses S. Grant, commander of the Union's Army of the Potomac. Lincoln was the first U.S. president to be successfully assassinated. Previously, there had been an unsuccessful attempt on the life of Andrew Jackson, the 7th president, in 1835, 30 years earlier. Lincoln himself had also been the target of an earlier, failed assassination attempt by an unknown assailant in August 1864. The assassination of Lincoln was carefully planned and carried out by John Wilkes Booth, a well-known stage actor, as part of a larger conspiracy aimed at altering the course of the Civil War in favor of the Confederacy. 3 of Booth's co-conspirators, Lewis Powell, David Harold, and George Atzerodt, were assigned to carry out coordinated attacks on other key members of the U.S. government. Powell and Harold were tasked with assassinating Secretary of State William H. Seward, while Atzerodt was assigned to kill Vice President Andrew Johnson. By eliminating the top 3 figures in the line of succession, Booth and his accomplices hoped to throw the U.S. government into chaos and disrupt its continuity. While attending the play Our American Cousin at Ford's Theater with his wife, Mary Todd Lincoln, the president was shot by Booth. He died the following morning. However, the conspiracy did not fully succeed. Seward survived with minor injuries, and Vice President Johnson was unharmed as the attack on him never took place. President Abraham Lincoln's funeral and burial were conducted with full state honors, marking a period of deep national mourning. President Andrew Jackson. On January 30th, 1835, President Andrew Jackson arrived at the U.S. Capitol to attend the funeral of Representative Warren R. Davis of South Carolina. A man named Richard Lawrence, armed and lying in wait behind a column, prepared to ambush the president as he exited through the east portico. As Jackson came within just 2 meters of him, Lawrence pulled out a pistol concealed beneath his coat and aimed it directly at the president, but the weapon misfired. In the panic that followed, Lawrence drew a second pistol and attempted to fire again. According to legend, President Jackson, furious and fearless, raised his cane and charged at his attacker, striking him repeatedly. Miraculously, the second pistol also misfired, sparing Jackson a second time. A nearby Navy officer quickly intervened and subdued Lawrence. This incident marked the first known assassination attempt on a sitting U.S. president, and Jackson survived without injury. Please comment below the video what you're thinking. Thank you for watching this video. If you like it and think about it, please give me a like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Sincerely thank you, and see you again.